So, I have a story to tell. I'm writing this because this story matters, not just for me, but for anyone who finds himself facing something unexpected after a medical intervention, and who then has to fight for recognition and answers. Now, I'm not a lawyer or a doctor. I'm a husband, a father, and someone who genuinely likes order and predictability. Neither of those things my body decided to respect back in March 2021. Now, when you get a vaccine, you expect a sore arm or maybe a day of feeling under the weather. You don't expect your face to stop working or to be left with excruciating pain that follows you for years. That's what makes medical uncertainty so cruel. It's ordinary people trying to translate clinical language into the reality of their lives. I'm recording this memoir because silence erases people like me. My story is proof that side effects do happen and they can really devastate lives, and that persistence matters to you. This is my attempt to record what happened to me, how I fought for acknowledgement, and what I learned along the way. So, part one, the jab. It all started for me in March 2021. I was 38 at the time. I wasn't in any at risk group. So, when I received a text message from my GP surgery inviting me to book a COVID vaccine, I was a little surprised. Still, I thought, heck, why not? I've never been anti vax, I'm still not. But this time I did hesitate a little. These vaccines were new, they hadn't gone through any of the usual years of testing, and I was relatively fit and healthy. Did I really need it? For a couple of days, I wrestled with a decision before eventually I decided to just suck it up and get it done. Millions of others were doing it, so what was the worst that could happen? So on Saturday, the 13th of March 2021, at 6 p.m., I drove to the Centre Court Hotel in Basingstoke, which had been turned into a vaccine centre. The hotel lobby, usually buzzing with business travellers, had been stripped back to rows of chairs and temporary signs taped to the walls. The air smelt pretty much strongly of disinfectant. Volunteers in high-vis jackets ushered people forward in small groups. Everyone was masked, shuffling a little awkwardly in the silence. I waited for a few minutes and was called forward and sat down. Now, I wasn't told until that moment which vaccine I'd be given, but it turned out to be the Astrazenica vaccine. Now, at the time, the only widely discussed side effects were sore arms and mild like flu symptoms. The news coverage focused mostly on how quickly the vaccine program was rolling out and how it was saving lives. Later, headlines would emerge about the rare cases of blood clots linked to AstraZeneca. This fueled debates and anxiety. But in March 2021, that hadn't broken through into the mainstream conversation. For most people, me included, there was no real expectation of any serious complications. Now, the jab itself was quick, painless, and I was in and out in maybe 15 minutes, driving home as though I just ticked off another chore for the weekend. But the next morning, I woke with a strange numbness in my tongue. It felt like I'd eaten too many Haribo Tang Fastics the night before. Odd, but not alarming. Maybe I'd bitten my tongue in my sleep. Now, at the time, I just bought a new house, and my partner was moving over from Germany in a few weeks' time, and I was getting the place ready for us to move into together. I was working during the day and decorating the new house during the evenings. The place smelled of paint, plaster dust, and my clothes were streaked with splashes of white gloss. It was exhausting but exciting. A new chapter about to begin. On the Sunday evening, I felt unusually sore and tired, but I put it down to a few hours painting. By Monday, the odd feelings lingered, the numb tongue, and a weird soreness in my right eye. Now, by Tuesday, the 16th of March, 72 hours after the jab, things had escalated. The right side of my face felt wrong, pretty sore and tight, heavy, and my right eye had a constant burning sting. That night, while video calling my kids from the new house, I asked my ex-wife to look at me to see if I looked odd. I felt odd. She said no. But later on the way home, smoking as I drove, I noticed I couldn't feel the cigarette in the right-hand corner of my mouth. It was completely numb. Now, at that point, alarm bells started to ring. As soon as I got home, I ran straight to the mirror. And there it was. The entire right side of my face was paralyzed. I couldn't even close my right eye or move my mouth. My first thought, of course, was, I've had a stroke. Now, the fear in that moment is really hard to describe. It was like the blood drained out of me all at once. And I remember gripping the sink, staring at my reflection and thinking of my kids. How would they see me if this was permanent, or would they be scared of me? Would I ever look the same again? I called an ambulance and explaining that I thought I'd had a stroke. Paramedics were great, arrived really quickly. Their green uniforms and calm voices, a really strange contrast to the panic that I was feeling inside. They noticed, although my face was paralyzed, my arms and legs worked fine. Pretty unusual for a stroke. Now, they decided to take me to Winchester Hospital. And on the way, one paramedic looked at me and said, I think you've got Bell's palsy. Now, I'd heard that term, but had no idea what it really meant. And in A&E, the doctors confirmed it. I was in and out within an hour. So I was discharged, stranded in Winchester, and had to get a very expensive taxi home. And the taxi ride back to Basingstoke was a bit of a blur through watering eyes. At home, reality hit. Although I couldn't move the right side of my face, I could still feel pain. And my open eye burned and itched constantly, dry from not being able to blink. I taped it shut that night with surgical tape so I could sleep. I was dizzy, nauseous, and in agony behind my right eye and temple. I tried to put on a brave face for my children, but inside I was terrified. Now, I saw my GP that week, and I was told that Bell's palsy usually clears up in 2 or 3 months. And thankfully mine did, much faster. Movement slowly returned after about 2 weeks, and I had pretty much complete control back of my face by week 4. The vertigo and nausea that come along with Bell's palsy eased, but the pain never left. It was a stinging, pulsating headache, lodged behind and above my right eye. It was always there. Painkillers didn't touch it at all. Now, the relief of getting my facial movement back was, of course, enormous, but I could smile again, eat normally, look people in the eye. But that joy was pretty quickly undercut by despair. The pain hadn't gone away. It was like being handed back half of your life while the other remained locked away. At first, I hoped it would fade, and my GP suggested it was just part of the Bell's palsy recovery, which could take a few months to disappear. But months passed, and it didn't shift. I managed an hour or 2 of work each day at best before having to retreat to bed. Curtains drawn, lights off, in silence. That room became my world. Blinds pulled down, a fan in the corner, bottles of water and pill packets on the bedside table. I'd suffered migraines as a teenager, but this was different. It was relentless, day after day, hour after hour. This wasn't an episode, it was a state of being. Now, by late 2021, I was starting to get really concerned. Nothing had changed since I got the feeling back in my face. I spoke to my GP again and was told I'd be referred to a neurologist. Eventually, what a relief. Well, short-lived relief. I received a letter a couple of weeks later to tell me that I'd been added to a waiting list and I should expect an appointment in around 54 weeks. Now, fortunately, and I was really one of the fortunate ones here, I had good private medical cover through my employer. So I was able to get an appointment with a private neurologist fairly quickly. The diagnosis was pretty blunt: chronic migraine. Not merely a lingering symptom of Bell's palsy, but a persistent, ongoing condition that had begun at the same time. Now, fortunately, again, the neurologist I saw also worked for the NHS and agreed to see me as an NHS patient. Now, this is important because most medical insurers don't cover long-term conditions. And although my consultant was covered, my insurer would not cover any long-term care. Now, what was to follow was a disheartening conveyor belt of medications, because the NHS route to the more effective and expensive migraine treatments required trials of cheaper, repurposed drugs. I was put on a succession of medicines originally designed for other illnesses, some for epilepsy, some for blood pressure, others borrowed from entirely different therapeutic areas. Now, I was told that there were 3 types of drugs I had to try first, each one for a course of 3 months. This was heartbreaking to hear. Even the neurologist admitted that it was an outside chance that any of these would work, but we had to go through this process. Now, at this point, I had to concede I could no longer work until the issue was resolved, or at least under some sort of control. I spoke to my GP at the start of December and was signed off work for a month, in the vague hope that the first medication would work. Little did I know, it wouldn't be until the following autumn that I was able to return to my job. Now, each new prescription arrived with a flicker of hope. I would think, yeah, maybe this one will work, and then days or weeks later, the same unmoving baseline of pain would remind me that it hadn't. There was an awful predictability to it. 3 drugs to try before being eligible for the higher cost options, and by then months had passed. I felt like being told I had to prove my suffering before I could access the proper care. I knew grimly that I was looking at least 9 months of trial and error before the good stuff might be considered. That knowledge sank me. Months blurred into a monotony of disappointment, and with each failed drug, my mood darkened. The optimism I'd clung to after the Bell's palsy began to crack. It was gone. I remember lying awake at night, convinced that nothing would ever ease the pain, that the rest of my life would be spent in some form of constant agony. That thought became its own additional weight on top of the physical pain. Now, living with chronic migraine is hard to convey unless you've been there. It's not a headache you can grit your teeth through. It's a state that colours every moment. There's a baseline, low-level grind that never quite lets you forget it. Light and sound become hostile. A kitchen light can feel like a drill through your skull. Food smells can turn rancid and trigger nausea. Concentration is a luxury. And just everyday tasks that used to be effortless, making breakfast, answering an email, or taking the kids to school, become mountains that you just can't climb. The condition erodes identity. I was known as someone who could juggle a demanding job, family life, and other projects, and suddenly I was a man who planned days around having to spend a significant amount of time in bed, that cancel social plans at the last minute, and really I was quite depressing to be around. There's a cognitive fog too, a blunting of thought that makes you slower, less witty, less yourself. That loss is as crucial as the pain because you lose autonomy over who you are. Coping becomes procedural. Pacing, darkness, avoidance, medication schedules, and rituals to try and coax sleep. I took long naps during the day because late nights were impossible. I avoided crowded places and loud shops, and the constancy of the pain meant that every day felt like a repeat of the last. At my lowest point, I became convinced that this was it. The rest of my life would be spent in agony with no escape. But I was also trying to search for answers and really finding very few. Every medical professional I spoke to seemed instinctively to be defending the vaccine. GPs and the first neurologists I saw were quick to reassure me that the vaccine was safe, and they were reluctant to discuss whether it could have caused my symptoms. It felt at times as if there was a consensus not to question the messaging. The vaccine was safe, everyone should take it, and that was that. Now, having exhausted the clinical route for answers, I even wrote to my MP, at the time was Maria Miller. I explained what happened and asked what I should do. I didn't expect an answer from her. I really wanted to make her aware. Now, she replied that she wasn't qualified to give medical advice and forwarded my concerns to a colleague, which was a polite but pretty unsatisfying response. Now, what struck me as particularly hypocritical was that her website at the time was plastered with statements urging people to get vaccinated. If she was confident enough to promote the vaccine so strongly, surely she could at least engage with my question rather than shutting it down the line. The contradiction left me feeling pretty frustrated and dismissed. It's as if my lived experience counted for nothing in the face of the official narrative, and it added to the sense of isolation that I was already struggling with a lot. Now, a few weeks later, I received a long letter from Nadim Zahawi, the vaccine's minister at the time. He began by expressing sympathy, but most of his letter reiterated that the vaccine was safe and encouraging people to take it. Not the answers I wanted to hope. I joined a Facebook support group for people reporting side effects, hoping for understanding. Instead, I experienced hostility, accusations of lying, demands for my neurologist's name, and cruel messages when I refused to share personal details. It felt like being shouted down by a public narrative that didn't allow for any nuance. That reaction only steeled my determination to find answers and push my case forward. My now wife, Lena, had just moved from Germany, suddenly found herself caring for someone who was always in pain. My children saw me, but always under the shadow of headaches. I tried every remedy I could think of. Over-the-counter pills, relaxation techniques. I even strapped a TENS machine to my face and turned it up to full so that I would feel something different. At night, alcohol became my escape. After a long time of not drinking, I was back to a bottle of wine a night just to knock myself out and sleep. Now, by summer of 2022, I was finally allowed to try the good treatment. This was a self-administered injection to my stomach once a month. At first, it was a miracle. The pain eased, the intensity dulled. I thought I was on my way back. Now, due to a monumental cock-up with income protection insurance, not a big fan of insurances, I had to return to work in September 22. Bullshit, it was the same day that the Queen died. Within weeks, the injections just stopped working. The pain roared back, and by early 23, it was clear that the treatment had failed. That crash from fragile hope to crushing disappointment was devastating. It was made harder by the wider context too. By 2023, the world was moving on. Restrictions had lifted, people were booking holidays again, and news coverage was focusing on the reopening of the economy and recovery. The national conversation has shifted to how quickly we can return to normal life. Well, for me, nothing can return to normal. While friends shared photos of nights out and family trips, I was in a darkened room, battling the pain that refused to lift. That contrast deepened the sense of being left behind, invisibility to a society eager to forget the shadows of the pandemic. By then, the media had largely stopped acknowledging vaccine side effects altogether. The official line was that the vaccines were safe, full stop. For someone still living with the consequences, that silence was deafening. It felt as if people like me had been erased from the story. In a way, that silence only fueled my determination. If I didn't speak up, if I didn't keep pushing, then my experience and the experiences of others in the same position would vanish without being recognized. In early 2023 came the nuclear option for treatment, something called a greater occipital nerve block. This is an injection with lidocaine into the back of my head. Brutal, I know it sounds, but finally effective. For the first time in 2 years, the pain disappeared. Since then, I've had an injection every 3 months. It's not a cure. The migraine is still there. It's lurking, occasionally flashing through with visual auras, but it allows me to function. Even now, though, my life has changed. I still sleep daily at lunchtime. I sleep badly at night, often needing alcohol to switch off. My routine has never recovered. The nerve blocks gave me my life back, but it's a fragile balance. If they stop working, I'll be back where I was. And every so often, the migraine aura reminds me that it's still there, waiting, just out of sight. Now, during this time, in November 2021, with my wife's help, I submitted a claim to the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme. Now, created in the 1970s, the scheme offers a fixed payment of £120,000 to people left at least 60% disabled by the vaccine injury. I thought I qualified. The process was painfully slow. For 2 years, the VDPS claimed they hadn't received my medical records. My GP insisted they'd never had the request, and only when I chased both sides on the same day did the records finally move. That was over 2 years wasted. Years when my illness was raw, my family was struggling, and every day felt like it should matter. Yet the system, as usual, stood still. I remember waiting every time I heard the letterbox go, hoping for an envelope that might finally contain some answers, only to find takeaway menus or gas bills. Now, by early 2024, 3 years after applying, I got their decision: rejection. They admitted the vaccine caused my Bell's palsy, but denied any link to the chronic migraine. This is despite both conditions appearing on the same day, on the same side of my face. I appealed, pointing out the obvious flaw in logic. Either the vaccines cause both directly, or the Bell's palsy triggered the migraine, or it was an extraordinary coincidence. 2 out of those 3 scenarios point to the vaccine. Still, my appeal was rejected. The next step was tribunal, and I was determined not to give up. Now, by late 2024, the NHS Business Services Authority, who deal with vaccine damage payment scheme, brought in solicitors, capsticks, to defend their position. I couldn't afford a lawyer, so I represented myself. And for months, we submitted evidence to the court. I corrected capsticks repeatedly on their mischaracterizations that I had migraines, plural. No, I had one continuous migraine since the vaccine was administered, or that I was claiming for some of the Bell's palsy side effects. I wasn't. The back and forth was draining. Some days I felt like giving up, but I knew I needed vindication. Not just money, but recognition. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't exaggerating. I wanted the record to show the truth. Late nights blurred into each other as I drafted responses, scrolling through medical journals, second-guessing every word because I knew I was up against solicitors who did this for a living. The intimidation was real, but so was my determination. Now, in July 25, Capstis requested an independent neurologist review. I objected, arguing that they'd had my records for years and so should have been able to come to the conclusion by now. It seemed to me like an obvious delay tactic. My condition hadn't changed since the first time I made the claim, and the first 2 rejections were supposedly carried out by independent neurologists, so why would this be any different? The tribunal judge agreed, stating that it wouldn't benefit anyone for a new neurologist to look at the case and carry out a desktop review, which is a review of a case purely by paperwork, not by actually examining the patient. But Capsticks commissioned one anyway. After the judge had made his ruling that a new report wasn't necessary, Capsticks responded with an admission that they had already commissioned the report to save time just in case the judge agreed to it. And the report really backfired on them. The neurologist concluded that the vaccine had indeed caused the chronic migraine. Faced with this, Capsticks and the NHS finally conceded causality. Now, the moment I read that report, I burst into tears. It was as if 4 years of weight lifted off me in an instant. For so long, I'd been dismissed, belittled, or ignored. Now, finally, an independent voice said what I'd known all along. The vaccine had caused this. The only question left was severity. Now, to qualify for the vaccine damage payment scheme threshold for payment, the disability level must be 60%. It always sounded like an arbitrary figure to me, but it's based on the Department of Work and Pensions severity ratings when deciding on workplace disability claims. So, with ChatGPT's help, I compiled a 4,000-word report citing WHO and NHS studies that showed chronic migraines as more disabling than quadriplegia or blindness. I submitted my report to the tribunal and waited. Now, my assumption was that Capsticks were busy doing the same, that they were compiling a report themselves aimed to convince the tribunal that my disability did not reach the required threshold. In September 2025, I received an email that left me completely stunned. Capsticks, or, well, their client, the NHS Business Services Authority, had conceded. An email totally out the blue to the tribunal judge stated that the respondent has undertaken a reassessment of its previous decision on its own initiative, in accordance with Section 3A of the 1979 Act, and now accepts the appealant's appeal. The relevant payment will be made to the appealant. After nearly 4 years, I won. Today, thanks to nerve blocks, I live a pretty close to normal life, although never fully free. I work full-time but need daily naps. Alcohol sometimes props up broken sleep, and the pain is always there, muted and waiting. But my fight was worth it. Not for the financial payout, but for the recognition. The vindication that what happened to me was real, caused by the vaccine, and disabling. Too many others give up in their first rejection, beaten down by the system. The VDPS is not fit for purpose. It's slow, obstructive, and stacked against claims. Reform is essential. I feel deep empathy for those who stop fighting. I know how exhausting it is to push back against bureaucracy while unwell. I understand why so many walked away. But I also feel anger that they were failed, that their voices weren't heard. That logic was dismissed in favour of blanket narratives. If my story shows anything, I hope it's that persistence matters and that recognition can be won. Yet when the news finally came through that I had won, I felt something unexpected alongside relief. Sadness. For nearly 4 years, this fight had defined so much of my life. The constant gathering of evidence, the endless correspondence, the stubborn determination it had given shape to my days, even when those days were hard. To have it end, even in victory, left a strange hollow space. It was as if part of me had been living only for this battle, and suddenly the battle was gone. I'm still rebuilding my life now, trying to find out what comes after years defined by illness and legal struggle. One of those steps is sharing this story, in the hope that it will inspire others not to give up, to keep fighting for recognition and fairness. Recording this is part of that determination, to put my experience on record and make sure it can't be erased, and to offer proof that persistence can change the outcome. If you're right, and if you fight, you can win.